Do you ever have a moment where you realize that someone has been documenting your life without your knowledge? Where you discover evidence of an invasion so complete that you can't even calculate how long it's been happening? That's the moment I'm talking about. And it started in the most mundane way possible. It started at a thrift store. My name is Nathan, and I'm a photographer. Not professional, exactly. More like serious amateur. I've been into photography since high school. I love the process of it. The mechanical nature of film cameras, the way you have to think about composition and light and timing, the way you can't just take 100 photos and pick the best one. With film, you get 36 exposures. You have to make them count. I shoot mostly with old film cameras that I find at thrift stores and antique shops. I collect them. I have maybe 20 working cameras in my apartment. It's a hobby that makes me happy. I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm 32 years old. I work as a graphic designer, which pays the bills, but doesn't fulfill me the way photography does. My weekends are usually spent shooting. I'll go to different neighborhoods. I'll walk around. I'll find interesting light. I'll compose shots. I'll come home and I'll develop the film in my makeshift darkroom, which is really just my bathroom with heavy blackout curtains taped over the window and a safe light rigged up in the corner. It's not ideal, but it works. About 6 months ago, I was at a Goodwill store looking for cameras. I do this regularly. I'll go to thrift stores and dig through their camera sections to see if there's anything worth buying. Sometimes you find real gems, cameras that are decades old and still function perfectly. Sometimes you find junk, but it's always worth looking. On this particular Saturday afternoon, I found a Nikon FM2 in the camera case section. It was priced at $12. The Nikon FM2 is a professional-grade film camera from the 1980s. $12 was an absolute steal. I bought it immediately. When I got home, I examined the camera carefully. The shutter seemed to work. The lens was clean. The viewfinder was clear. It was in genuinely good condition. But there was something inside the camera. A film canister. Someone had left a half-used roll of film in the camera. This happens sometimes. People buy old cameras and don't realize there's film in them. Or they load film and then forget about it and the camera ends up at Goodwill years later. I carefully removed the film canister and noted that it was Kodak Portra 400, which is professional-grade color film. This was expensive film. Someone had been a serious photographer. I did something that I probably shouldn't have done. I decided to develop the film. I know that this was someone else's film. I know that I was invading their privacy by processing their photographs, but I was curious. I wanted to see what a previous owner of this camera had been shooting. I wanted to see their vision. I wanted to understand what had compelled them to load professional-grade film into this camera and then apparently abandon it for years. I processed the film carefully in my bathroom darkroom. I followed the standard process for color film development. 38 minutes in the developer at the right temperature. Stops. Rinse. Fix. Rinse again. Dry. And then I scanned the negatives into my computer so I could see the images. What I saw made my entire body go cold. The photographs were of me. Every single frame was of me. There were 36 exposures, and every one of them was a photograph of my face. Some were taken from a distance. Some were close-ups. Some were of me walking down the street. Some were of me sitting in a coffee shop. Some were of me at the farmer's market. They were all candid. They were all taken without my knowledge or consent, and I had no idea who had taken them or when they had been taken. I stared at the scanned images for a long time. I couldn't process what I was looking at. These were professional quality photographs. They were well composed. The lighting was good. The exposure was correct. Whoever had taken these photos had skill. They had also been stalking me. They had spent time following me, documenting me. And then they had abandoned the camera at Goodwill, apparently not caring if someone else found the film and developed it. I tried to figure out when the photographs had been taken. Some of the backgrounds looked familiar. There was one shot taken outside a coffee shop that I used to frequent about 2 years ago. There was one shot taken in front of a building that I recognized as a location I had visited about 18 months ago. The photographs spanned time. They weren't all from one day. They were from multiple days, spread across months. Maybe longer. I printed several of the photographs and I stared at them. My face, over and over. My face in different places. My face in different lighting. My face without my knowledge. And I started to ask myself the question that I couldn't answer. Who had been photographing me? And why had they stopped? And where was that person now? I called the Goodwill where I had bought the camera. I explained the situation to the manager. I asked if they had any information about who had donated the camera, but of course they didn't. Goodwill doesn't keep records of donations unless the donor is requesting a tax receipt, and most people don't. The manager suggested that I contact the police if I was concerned about stalking. I called the police non-emergency line. I made a report. I explained that I had found film with unauthorized photographs of myself and a camera I had purchased at Goodwill. The officer who took my report was skeptical. He asked if I was certain that the photographs were of me and not someone who looked like me. He asked if it was possible that I had forgotten about the photographs being taken. He asked if maybe I had loaned the camera to someone. His skepticism made me doubt myself, even though I knew with absolute certainty that I had never seen that camera before and that I had never knowingly posed for any of those photographs. But the officer did say that they would keep my report on file. He said that if anything else happened, if I noticed someone following me, or if I found more photographs, I should contact them immediately. He took down my information and my phone number, and then he told me that without more concrete evidence or a specific threat, there wasn't much he could do. I spent the next week obsessing over those photographs. I printed them all out, and I spread them across my apartment. I tried to figure out when each one had been taken. I tried to identify the locations. I tried to create a timeline. What I discovered was that the oldest photograph appeared to have been taken about 2.5 years ago. That was as far back as I could trace it, based on recognizable landmarks in the background and the clothes I was wearing. 2.5 years. Someone had been photographing me for at least 2.5 years, and I had no idea. I started going back to thrift stores. I started looking through camera sections more carefully. I started buying old cameras and checking if they had film in them. It became an obsession. I wanted to find out if there were more photographs, if there were more cameras out there with film that had been abandoned, if I could trace the pattern and figure out who had been doing this. Over the next 3 months, I found 5 more cameras at various thrift stores in Portland. 4 of them had film in them, and 3 of those 4 had photographs of me on the film. Different photographer, different style. But still me. Still candid shots taken without my knowledge. Still documentation of my movements through the city. Each roll came from a different thrift store. Each roll spanned different time periods. But the message was the same. Someone was photographing me. Multiple someones, apparently, or the same person using different cameras and donating them at different locations. The photograph collection was growing. I now had evidence of at least 2 different people photographing me over the course of several years, and I had no idea who they were, or why they were doing it, or if they were still doing it. The police weren't taking it seriously. They suggested that maybe I was attracting attention because I was attractive, or because I was a recognizable figure in the community. One officer even suggested that maybe I should consider the possibility that this was some kind of art project, that someone was creating a documentary about me without my knowledge, but for artistic purposes rather than malicious ones. I became paranoid. I became aware of every person I saw more than once, every face in the background of my own photographs, every glance in my direction. I started carrying a camera with me everywhere I went, not to take photographs, but to identify people who might be photographing me. I started paying attention to who was behind me, who was across the street from me, who might be documenting my movements, and then I found something that changed everything. I was at an antique mall in southeast Portland. I was digging through the camera section like I always did, and I found a Hasselblad 500 series camera. Professional equipment. Expensive. In a weathered leather case. I opened the case, and I found a camera and a half-used roll of film. I bought it without even thinking about it. When I developed the film at home, I found photographs of me again. But these photographs were different. They were taken from inside buildings. They were taken through windows. They were taken from angles that suggested the photographer had been in places where they shouldn't have been. There was a photograph of me asleep in my apartment, taken through my bedroom window. There was a photograph of me showering, visible through a gap in my bathroom curtains. There was a photograph of me sitting at my desk working on my computer, taken from outside my apartment building, looking in through a window. These weren't candid street photography. These were invasion of privacy. These were evidence of someone who had been inside my space, someone who knew where I lived, someone who had documented my private moments. I sat on my bathroom floor holding the developed negatives, and I felt genuine terror. Pure, crystalline terror, because up until that moment, I had been able to convince myself that this was some kind of distant documentation, some kind of art project or obsession that didn't directly threaten my physical safety. But intimate photographs taken through my own windows suggested something much darker. I reported this to the police immediately. I brought the photographs with me to the station. I showed them the images of me asleep and showering. I told them that someone had been watching me through my windows, that someone had access to my apartment building, that someone had been documenting my private moments. This time, the police took it seriously. They opened a full investigation. The detectives assigned to the case were different from the officer who had taken my initial report. They were thorough. They asked detailed questions about the apartments I had lived in. They asked about the timeline of when the photographs had been taken. They asked if I had noticed anyone following me or taking an unusual interest in me. They suggested that I change the locks on my apartment. They suggested that I install security cameras. They suggested that I be very careful about who I let into my space. But they also told me something that made my blood run cold. They told me that this wasn't uncommon, that they had dealt with cases like this before, that there were people out there who were obsessed with photographing strangers without their knowledge, that some of them were organized, that some of them shared their photographs online, that what I had discovered might be just the tip of a much larger operation. The police pulled security footage from my apartment building. They reviewed months of video, and they found something. A man who appeared regularly in the hallway outside my apartment. A man who was caught on camera standing outside my door on multiple occasions. A man who appeared to be testing the lock on my door. A man who had never been identified as a resident or a visitor. A man who seemed to be measuring the windows of my apartment from the hallway. They identified him. His name was Michael Brennan. He was 42 years old. He worked as a courier for a local delivery company, which gave him access to apartment buildings throughout the city. He had no prior criminal record, but when the police searched his apartment, they found thousands of photographs. Thousands of different people, all taken without consent, all organized into files by subject. He had been doing this for years. He had built an entire archive of non-consensual photography. And I was just one subject among many. Michael Brennan was arrested and charged with stalking, voyeurism, and breaking and entering. He was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 7 years in prison. But 7 years doesn't undo what he did. 7 years doesn't erase the knowledge that someone had been watching me through my windows, that someone had spent years documenting my private moments, that someone had created an archive of photographs of me sleeping, showering, living my life. I moved out of Portland. I couldn't stay in a city where I had been photographed and stalked. I couldn't walk down the street without wondering if someone was documenting my movements. I couldn't sleep without closing all my curtains and installing blackout shades. I couldn't shower without checking a window first. I couldn't exist in my own space without feeling observed. I sold most of my cameras. I gave up photography. Whenever I see a camera now, I think about Michael Brennan. I think about the thousands of photographs he had taken. I think about the other people in those photographs. People who didn't even know they were being documented. People who didn't know their privacy had been invaded. People who might never know what had been done to them. The police kept the film rolls that I had found. They were evidence. But they also represented something else. They represented the fact that Michael Brennan had been careless enough to donate cameras with film still in them to thrift stores. That he had abandoned evidence of his crimes. That he had assumed no one would care enough to develop old film or to make the connection between photographs and the person in them. If I hadn't been curious about that first film roll, if I hadn't developed it, if I hadn't decided to search thrift stores for more cameras, Michael Brennan might still be doing what he was doing. He might still be photographing people without their knowledge. He might still be building his archive. He might still be watching. And I think about that every single day. I think about the moment I realized that my face had been documented by a stranger, that my private moments had been preserved without my consent, that someone out there had been thinking about me in ways I never wanted to be thought about, that my image had been cataloged and filed and studied by someone I had never met. The worst part isn't the invasion of privacy. The worst part is the knowledge that you can never truly know when you're being watched. You can never know if someone is documenting your movements. You can never know if your image has been captured and cataloged by someone with an unhealthy obsession. You can never feel completely safe in your own space again, because once you know that it's possible, once you have evidence that it happened, you can never fully believe that it's not happening again. The paranoia becomes rational. The fear becomes reasonable. And you're left with the knowledge that somewhere out there, there might be more film, there might be more cameras, there might be more evidence of someone else's obsession with your image. All of this started with a $12 camera at Goodwill. All of this started with a thrift store purchase and a decision to process a roll of film that didn't belong to me, and it ended with me learning that my entire sense of privacy had been an illusion, that I had been documented by a stranger, that I had been watched in my most vulnerable moments, that somewhere in a police evidence locker there are photographs of me that I never consented to, photographs that prove beyond any doubt that someone had decided I was worth the effort of stalking. Someone had decided that my image was worth preserving, and that knowledge will stay with me forever.